Here's a pattern that repeats throughout history. A nation goes to war. Soldiers fight. Battles are won or lost. Then, decades later, that nation is still paying for it. World War I ended in 1918. Britain finished paying for it in 2015, 97 years later. The American Civil War ended in 1865. Some of its debt wasn't fully resolved until the 1930s, 70 years later. Iraq and Afghanistan? The US has spent over $8 trillion so far, and will be paying interest on that debt for the next 40 years. War and debt are inseparable twins. Every major conflict in history has been financed by borrowing, and every borrowing has shaped the nation's future for generations. Today, we're exploring why war creates debt, how countries pay for conflicts they can't afford, and why the financial consequences of war last far longer than the battles themselves. Because understanding war debt isn't just about history. It's about understanding why your country's budget looks the way it does right now. Let's start with the fundamental question. Why does war always create massive debt? Reason 1, the immediate cost explosion. When war begins, government spending skyrockets instantly. Normal peacetime spending might be military, 15 to 20% of budget, social programs, 40 to 50%, infrastructure, 10 to 15%, everything else, 20 to 30%. Wartime spending becomes military, 50 to 80% of budget. Everything else, compressed or eliminated. Real numbers, World War II, 1940. U.S. federal spending, $9.5 billion. 1945, U.S. federal spending, $92.7 billion. That's a 976% increase in 5 years. You can't raise taxes fast enough to cover that. Even if you doubled or tripled tax rates, it wouldn't be enough. So governments borrow. Reason 2, economic disruption. War doesn't just increase spending, it destroys the tax base. What happens during war? Productive workers become soldiers, lost tax revenue. Factories switch from consumer goods to weapons, less economic activity to tax. Trade routes disrupted, reduced customs revenue. Businesses fail, reduced corporate taxes. Citizens have less money, reduced income taxes. The paradox? Government needs more money exactly when its ability to raise money collapses. Reason 3, the political impossibility of wartime taxes. Imagine a government saying, "We're sending your sons to die and doubling your taxes to pay for it." Political suicide. Instead, governments say, "We'll borrow now, pay later. Future generations will handle it." This is always the choice. Lose the war due to lack of funds or win the war and burden the future with debt. Reason 4, wars last longer than expected. Every war starts with optimistic assumptions. World War I, it'll be over by Christmas. Lasted 4 years. Vietnam, a few years at most. Lasted 20 years. Afghanistan, quick operation. Lasted 20 years. Budget projections are always wrong. By the time reality hits, you're too deep to stop. The debt just keeps growing.
So how do nations finance conflicts they can't afford? There are only a few options, all with consequences. Method 1. War bonds, borrowing from your own citizens. How it works. Government issues bonds specifically for the war effort. Citizens buy them. Patriotic duty plus financial return. Government gets immediate cash. Citizens get paid back with interest over decades. Real example, World War II. US issued war bonds starting at $25. Hollywood stars promoted them. 85 million Americans bought them. out of 130 million population, raised $185 billion, $2.7 trillion in today's money. The genius? It's borrowing, but also removes money from circulation, controls inflation during rationing, creates patriotic buy-in, spreads cost across entire population. The cost? You're indebting your own citizens to fund the war. They'll expect repayment for decades. Method 2. Foreign loans. Borrowing from allies. How it works? Borrow from nations that benefit from your victory, usually at favorable rates. They want you to win. Creates long-term financial relationships and dependencies. Real example, World War I. Britain borrowed heavily from the US. France borrowed from Britain and US. Germany borrowed from everyone who would lend. Post-war consequences. Britain spent 40% of budget on war debt payments through the 1920s. This debt burden contributed to Great Depression, wasn't fully paid until 2015. The catch? Winning the war means decades of payments. Losing means potential default and economic collapse. Method 3. Money printing, the dangerous option. How it works? Central bank simply creates money. Government spends it on the war. No immediate debt, but the consequence? Inflation or worse. Case study: the Confederacy, U.S. Civil War. Printed money to fund the war effort. By 1865, Confederate dollar was worth 1.6 cents. Inflation rate? 5,000%. Soldiers were paid in worthless paper. Case study: Weimar Germany, post-World War I. Had to pay war reparations, decided to print money. 1923, inflation hit 3.25 times 10 to the 6th% per month. Wheelbarrows of cash for bread. Middle class destroyed. Created conditions for Nazi rise. The rule? Print money for war, face inflation crisis later. Method 4. Austerity and extraction. How it works? Cut non-war spending to bone. Raise taxes dramatically. Confiscate resources. Force population to sacrifice. Real example, Soviet Union, World War II. Rationed food severely. Conscripted labor. Redirected all industry to war production. Citizens starved while tanks were built. The cost? Human suffering and potential political instability. The reality? Most countries use all these methods simultaneously, and all create long-term consequences. Here's what most people don't understand. The war bill doesn't end when the shooting stops. Long-term cost 1. Veteran care. The obligation doesn't end at victory. Medical care for wounded soldiers. Decades. Disability payments. Lifetime. Pensions. Until
Death. Mental health treatment, often delayed, then expensive. Real numbers. U.S. Civil War. War ended, 1865. Last Civil War veteran died, 1956. Last widow receiving pension, 2003. 138 years of payments. Modern example, Iraq, Afghanistan. Direct war cost, $2.3 trillion. Veteran care cost through 2050, estimated $2.5 trillion. More expensive after the war than during it. Long-term cost 2. Infrastructure rebuilding. Wars destroy roads, bridges, ports, factories and industrial capacity, housing and civilian infrastructure, agricultural land, unexploded ordnance, contamination. Rebuilding costs often exceed war costs. World War II, Europe. Marshall Plan, $15 billion. $173 billion today. Entire European industrial base had to be rebuilt. Took 20 years to fully recover. Vietnam, Agent Orange cleanup. Still ongoing. $300+ million and counting. Unexploded ordnance. Estimated 800,000 tons still buried. Removal cost? $10+ billion over decades. Long-term cost 3. Lost productivity. The hidden cost of dead and disabled workers. World War I. 20 million dead. 21 million wounded. Most were young men in prime working years. Economic productivity lost? Incalculable. Soviet Union, World War II. 27 million dead, 13.5% of population. Lost an entire generation of workers. Economic impact lasted until USSR collapsed. Long-term cost, 4. Opportunity cost. Money spent on war debt is money not spent on education, healthcare, infrastructure, research and development, economic growth. U.S. example, present day. Interest on national debt, $640 billion per year. Much of this is old war debt. That's more than education budget, NASA, EPA, Justice Department combined. If that money went to education instead, different country. Let's look at specific conflicts and their devastating financial aftermaths. Case 1. The Napoleonic Wars and Britain's Century of Debt. The conflict, 1803 to 1815. Britain fought France for 12 years, financed huge coalition armies across Europe, borrowed massively to sustain war effort. The financial aftermath? National debt reached 260% of GDP by 1815. Took 100 years to pay down. Income tax introduced temporarily in 1799. Still exists today. Shaped British economic policy until World War I. The lesson? Even winners pay forever. Britain won the war but spent a century in financial constraint. Case 2. World War I and the collapse of empires. The financial carnage. British Empire? Spent £35 billion, £2 trillion today. Went from world's largest creditor to major debtor. Lost financial dominance to United States. Never fully recovered. German Empire. War cost? 164 billion marks. Then reparations. 132 billion marks. Impossible burden led to hyperinflation. Economic chaos enabled Hitler. Austro-Hungarian Empire. Completely bankrupted. Empire literally dissolved. Currency became worthless. Russian Empire. War debt plus revolution equals economic collapse. Defaulted on all debts. Communist takeover partially due to war bankruptcy. Ottoman
Empire, financially destroyed, lost all territories. Turkey emerged from ruins. The lesson? World War I didn't just kill 20 million people. It killed empires and reshaped global financial order. Case 3. Vietnam and the end of Bretton Woods. The connection most people miss. U.S. in 1960s, fighting expensive war in Vietnam. Also funding Great Society programs, running huge deficits, printing dollars to cover costs. The problem? Bretton Woods system, dollar backed by gold at $35 an ounce. U.S. had promised any country can trade dollars for gold, but U.S. was printing more dollars than it had gold. Other countries noticed. France started demanding gold for dollars. Other nations followed. U.S. gold reserves depleting. 1971, Nixon's choice. Either stop the war, politically impossible, or break gold standard. He chose break gold standard. Dollar became pure fiat currency. The consequence? Entire global monetary system changed because of one war's cost. We're still living with those consequences. Case 4. Iraq, Afghanistan, and the 2008 financial crisis. The connection people don't discuss. 2001 to 2008. U.S. fighting 2 wars. Cost $2+ trillion. Financed entirely by borrowing, not taxes. Fed kept interest rates low to make borrowing cheap. Low interest rates meant easy credit for everyone. Housing bubble inflated. Financial risk-taking increased. 2008 crash. Direct causation? Debatable, but the war debt contributed to the environment that created the crisis. The lesson? War financing decisions have unexpected ripple effects through the entire economy. Case 5. Russia, Ukraine, and Europe's energy crisis. Real-time example. 2022 to 2024. Russia invades Ukraine. West sanctions Russian energy. Energy prices spike globally. European inflation hits 10% plus. Government spending explodes. Energy subsidies, military aid, refugee support. Financial impact. Germany, €200 billion energy relief package. UK, £150 billion. France, €45 billion. All borrowed money. The outcome? Europe's debt levels rising sharply. Will take decades to resolve. Plus, Ukraine will need $500+ billion to rebuild. Who pays? More debt. Here's the paradox. Winning and losing wars both create financial disaster, just different kinds. When you lose a war, the immediate costs, all the money spent, wasted, infrastructure destroyed, needs rebuilding, territory lost, reduced tax base, reparations, additional debt imposed by winners. Example, Germany after World War I. Lost the war. Treaty of Versailles. Pay 132 billion marks. Had to give up industrial regions. Hyperinflation destroyed economy. Led to World War II. When you win a war, you'd think winners have it easier. You'd be wrong. The winner's costs, all the war spending, still needs repaying. Veteran care, decades of obligations. Occupation costs, maintaining peace isn't free. Rebuilding allies, often falls to winner. Example, US after World War II. Won the war decisively, but debt was 119% of GDP. Plus, had to rebuild Europe. Marshall Plan. Plus, maintain global military presence. Took 30+ years to get debt under control. Example, Britain after World War I. Won the war, lost an entire generation of men, took on massive debt, lost economic dominance. Empire began falling apart. The pattern. Wars are so expensive that even winners can't really afford them. The only real winner? The country that doesn't fight. Example, US in World War I. Entered late, 1917. Fought for 18 months versus Europe's 4 years. Casualties, 116,000 versus Europe's 20 million. Came out as world's biggest creditor. Became financial superpower. Lesson. The best financial strategy for war is avoiding it, or entering only when outcome is certain. Let's talk about today. How does war debt work in the 21st century? The new pattern. Forever wars with invisible costs. Traditional wars. Clear beginning and end. Congressional declaration. Defined enemy. Victory or defeat. Modern conflicts. No formal declaration. Ambiguous objectives. No clear end date. Ongoing indefinitely. Financial consequence? The debt just keeps growing with no resolution. Afghanistan. The 20-year bill. Direct spending breakdown. Military operations. $837 billion. Base support and operations. $444 billion. Transportation. $25 billion. Weapons and equipment. $93 billion. Reconstruction. $145 billion. Total, $2.3 trillion. But that's not the full story. The real cost? Interest on borrowing, $530 billion so far. Future veteran care, $2.5 trillion estimated through 2050. Actual total? Over $5 trillion. For a war most Americans forgot was happening. The drone warfare cost illusion. Politicians claim drones are cheap, no American casualties, low cost. The reality? Drone strike, $100,000 to $300,000 each. Thousands conducted. Plus, intelligence infrastructure. Plus, base operations. Plus, political fallout costs. And it's all borrowed money. The global war on terror, a debt machine. Since 9/11, US has spent $8+ trillion on post-9/11 wars. All borrowed, none was paid with taxes. Added directly to national debt. Interest compounds forever. The math? Current national debt, $35 trillion. Post-9/11 war spending, $8 trillion. 23% of current debt is directly from these wars. Every dollar of interest you pay on national debt, 23 cents is for wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and elsewhere. The political game, hiding war costs. How governments obscure war spending. 1. Emergency funding. Not in regular budget, so doesn't count. 2. Overseas contingency operations. Sounds better than war. 3. Debt financing. No tax increases, so voters don't feel pain directly. 4. Spreading costs over decades. Today's war is tomorrow's problem. The consequence: democratic accountability breaks down. Citizens don't feel the true cost, so wars continue. So are we doomed to repeat this forever? Is there a way to break the war debt cycle? Historical attempts that failed. 1. The Washington Farewell Address, 1796. George Washington warned against foreign entanglements, specifically cited debt consequences of war, ignored by every president since 2. The Kellogg-Briand Pact, 1928. 63 nations agreed to renounce war, lasted 11 years until World War II. 3. The United Nations, supposed to prevent wars through collective security. Wars continue regardless. Why breaking the cycle is hard. Reason 1. Security dilemma. Each nation fears others, must maintain military, creates arms races, eventually leads to conflict. Reason 2. Economic interests. Defense contractors profit from conflict, jobs tied to military spending. Political donations from defense industry. Creates pro-war lobby. Reason 3. Sunk cost fallacy. Once at war, hard to admit mistake. We can't let their deaths be in vain. Keep fighting to justify past costs. Debt spiral continues. Reason 4. Delayed consequences. Politicians who start wars are gone when bills come due. Future generations pay. Removes accountability. What could work, but probably won't? Option 1. Constitutional debt limits for war. Require wars to be paid within X years. If can't afford it, can't fight it. Problem: national security emergencies exist. Option 2. War taxes. Automatically raise taxes when war declared. Citizens feel immediate cost. Creates democratic check. Problem: politicians would never vote for this. Option 3. Mandatory war bonds. Can only fight wars financed by citizen bonds. No foreign borrowing. Limited by population's willingness to lend. Problem: disadvantages democracies versus autocracies. Option 4. International debt forgiveness. Treaty. War debts automatically forgiven after conflict. Removes financial incentive. Problem: who would ever lend for defense then? The realistic future. None of these will happen. So, we'll continue the pattern. 1. Crisis emerges. 2. Nation goes to war. 3. Finances war with debt. 4. Future generations pay. 5. Repeat. The only real hope? Wars become so expensive that they're literally unaffordable, even with borrowing. Nuclear weapons partially achieved this. World War III hasn't happened, partially because the cost, nuclear annihilation, is too high. Maybe economic reality will create similar deterrent.
If wars consistently bankrupt nations, they'll happen less. Unfortunately, history suggests nations go to war anyway, even when they can't afford it. So what have we learned? War and debt are inseparable. Every major conflict in history has been financed by borrowing. Every single one. The costs last generations. Your great-great-grandchildren will be paying interest on today's conflicts. Winners and losers both go broke. Military victory doesn't equal financial victory. The bill is hidden but real. That interest payment on national debt, much of it is old war costs. The cycle continues. Despite knowing this pattern, nations keep making the same choice. Fight now, pay forever. The uncomfortable truth: the next time your government considers